Delivering successful data projects, particularly in data warehousing, is fraught with challenges that undermine quality, scalability, and long-term value. Without independent assurance, iterative experimentation, and a clear focus on understanding the problem, data projects risk becoming costly, bespoke builds that fail to deliver lasting value or adapt to evolving needs. In today's episode, we will explore how to tame the data beast and overcome chaos in warehousing projects with one of my favourite people in the world, the masterful Julian Hebden. At Powering ProjeX, we champion the growth of project people, empowering every subscriber to lead with distinction, drive impactful outcomes, and turn vision into victory. Through sharp insights, inspiring stories, and energetic conversations, we will celebrate the exceptional people who transform industries and build a better world. Welcome to the Powering ProjeX podcast, where we dive deep into the world of project management, data innovation, and the art of turning complex challenges into successful outcomes. I'm your host, DK, and today we are thrilled to be joined by Julian Hebden, a seasoned data warehousing specialist with a wealth of experience transforming how organisations harness data to drive impactful decisions. But before we kick off, if you want to join a community that puts your career first, gain global connections and cutting-edge skills, and hear from voices just like yours who are shaping the project management industry, subscribe to the podcast now. So the problem statement for today. Delivering data projects, particularly in data warehousing, is fraught with challenges that undermine quality, scalability, and long-term value. This is often caused by various factors like misaligned incentives between stakeholders who are driven by competing priorities, which often leads to scope creep and compromised solutions. Also, inadequate access to subject matter experts, coupled with a lack of robust assurance processes, leaving projects vulnerable to overlooked edge cases and mounting technical debt, noting that many valuable development sprints are consumed by data remediation work. Vendors, frequently judged on time and cost rather than quality, which may result in unfit solutions. And lastly, a failure to embrace a learning mindset and plan for potential failures, compounded by emotional and human factors such as resistance to transparency or hubris, which results in repeated missteps across complex systems. Without independent assurance, iterative experimentation, and a clear focus on understanding the problem, data projects risk becoming costly, bespoke builds that fail to deliver lasting value or adapt to evolving needs. In this episode, we'll explore the critical role of governance in data projects, unpack key lessons learnt from decades in the field, and uncover strategies for navigating the complexities of modern data initiatives with the masterful Julian Hebden. Julian is a distinguished data warehousing specialist and a recognised leader in leveraging data to drive strategic outcomes. With a career spanning both the private and public sectors, Julian has held pivotal roles, including serving as Victoria's inaugural Chief Data Officer, where he led the establishment of the Centre for Data Insights within the Department of Premier and Cabinet. Previously, as the head of Big Data at Telstra, Julian honed his expertise in designing and implementing cutting-edge data architectures. His work has focused on transforming how organisations use data to inform policy, enhance service delivery, and address complex challenges such as family violence prevention. Known for his deep understanding of governance, assurance, and the intricacies of large-scale data projects, Julian brings a pragmatic and innovative approach to ensuring data systems are robust, scalable, and fit for purpose. Today, he continues to shape the future of data-driven decision-making, emphasising the importance of learning from failure, fostering diverse collaboration, and maintaining a sharp focus on quality in data initiatives. From tackling technical debt to ensuring robust assurance processes, Julian's insights are sure to spark inspiration for project leaders and data professionals alike. Welcome, Julian.
Hi, Daniela. How you going?
I'm really well, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
Great, let's dive in. All right, so my first question to you, Julian, and it's been wonderful to reconnect with you after working together all those years ago. So, can you share a little bit about your journey in data warehousing and what excites you most about the field today?
Exciting and data warehousing in the same sentence. Interesting. They're not always in the same sentence. No, it is an exciting time. Okay, so where to start? I suppose my journey actually started in finance. Uh, I was did some quite senior roles in finance, but I think the most pivotal stuff is I did a lot of stuff in with processes that were really badly damaged, and we were losing money and stuff like that. And so the importance of the process. So the data is just the voice of the process. So getting involved in how you have affect change in processes was really important. So I always say to data people today, we love the bit in the middle. We love the hardware and all of that stuff and building the warehouse, but the process starts with the business process and ends with the business process. If you don't affect a change in the business process, you ain't done anything. You might have produced a nice report, but you haven't done anything. And the objective is to affect a change in the process. So that's kind of the start of my journey. And that kind of made me, I guess, have some understanding of data because we needed to use that to understand how the processes worked. And this is back in 20 odd years ago, back in T-Mobile in the UK. And so, I wanted to get a change from having to do month ends and things like that in finance. So I basically said to my boss, and she said, "Oh, what do you want to do?" "I want to go to IT to work in business intelligence." She goes, "Oh my God, the worst of the worst." But it was really good. It was really interesting, but it was way more complex than I'd ever imagined it could be compared to finance, completely different league. I landed in an environment where they'd got two data warehouses, neither were running right. Projects had failed, stopped, and then to replace the first warehouse, and everyone was still using the original warehouse. No, it's just a bit of a nightmare. For the first 5 months, we missed month end. So the warehouse was supporting finance, and the boxes were crashing. Couldn't write out core dumps. Got to know about hardware quite well in those days. This is the Oracle data warehouse and business objects and all back in those kind of with that kind of technology. But it was the technology necessarily. So what it did teach me was I'm not going through that again. Poor quality. It was so painful having to turn up to the CFO and say, "Nope, the warehouse is down again, or we're backloading, we're loading, trying to catch up." So that was kind of very formative. Then I moved on to got the job at Telstra to do business intelligence, which was mammoth. So many, I think we always say it's like 70 marts and warehouses and stuff like that you ended up looking after, and pretty much all of them had problems. Did I think a pretty good job of stabilizing and then getting the warehouse certainly to operate a lot better. Like doing 5 or 6 million queries a day in the end, which is pretty good. So it's well used, and so that was good. I mean, I wouldn't say it was perfect, but we did a lot of work to get that right. So that's that, and then took on big data, which was a good challenge. Because at the time it was, this was the new big thing, like AI is today, right? Everyone's terribly excited to do that, so it's quite a good job. And I always said it's great. I don't have to build any more warehouses. Little did I know. So I did that for a short while, which was really good. And then moved on finally onto the Victorian government, where I was the first chief data officer. And so Telstra was this kind of environment of lots of warehouses, really remediating a lot of things that hadn't been done quite as well as they could have been done. Well, the Victorian government was completely different. So it was greenfield site, first chief data officer was first. I'm not saying that there wasn't capability in the departments. There was, but centrally there wasn't. So that was a real strange contrast from this really massive estate with issues to this. Well, go on then, back yourself in, do it properly this time. So then that was a learning of how you do these things properly without the incumbencies of all the historical problems that had been inherited. Now I'm consulting, so I'm helping other people now, which I love. I really love it. So there we go.
That is such an interesting story because what I hear through that is lots and lots of battle scars, from things that have not gone very well and having to sort through that.
Yeah. But
Right.
safe is to say it was big and rambling, the estate. Yeah,
It
yeah.
was, it was. And on any given week, we had so many issues to work our way through. I mean, I've never seen a longer list of work to do.
What was it? One the EDW, one of all of those marts and warehouses had 200 job failures a night. Yeah,
Oh
there was a lot of
God.
repair work to be
Oh,
done, shall we say? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And we will go into that a little bit later on. But moving on to the next one, you've emphasized the importance of governance in data projects. Can you explain what effective governance looks like in the context of a data warehousing initiative and why it's so critical to the success?
Data governance in general has got lots of facets. But, governance is a broad church of different applications of governance, right? So in our domain anyway. But in terms of data warehousing, we stood up a technical governance team, and that was yes, we've got great engineers. Yes, they're doing a great job repairing this thing and putting it on there and even tech, but we can't just trust that. We need a second layer of defense. And so a lot of governance is people sitting in committee meetings reviewing stuff. It's really hard to do it like that, right? I mean, I've done that, and I feel I'm reasonably qualified to do it. And yeah, it's still really not impossible to really assure quality. So you've got to be in the process. So the idea was technical governance were in there, and when the developers are under pressure, the technical governance team would be going, "You're not putting it." So they might shortcut a process. They might try and do this, and they're protecting the overall integrity of the thing rather than That's not to say the developers aren't really good engineers and everything, but they're often being under pressure to sort of maybe cut corners, and so the technical governance team would be that next layer of defense to say because quality is so important, very hard and very expensive to recover from. So that for me is really important, and that independence, right? They're not under pressure day in day out. So yeah, I mean they've got to be reasonable, I think, and that's a challenge. I'm not sure I got that right either. By the way, I think I didn't really do a good job of explaining to the development team that it isn't, and isn't a reflection of the lack of quality they're doing. It is really another layer of control over quality, which was so important to do that. So I think my advice to anyone would be: I think you need an independent person that's focused and motivated just around the quality, and they can report out through the projects. Um, but that you need to make sure that doesn't cast aspersions on the other people that think they're doing a quality job as well.
Mm. And let's just differentiate between these two things because there is data
Yeah,
governance and then there is the technical governance and then there is the project governance. Three totally
yeah.
different governance boards with different remits. What's kind of the difference between the way we work through technical governance versus data governance, just to give me a picture of it in my mind?
This is my interpretation, by the way, because if you can find an internationally a standard, there's loads of them. And everyone uses different terms for the same thing. And I had a conversation recently with a head of BI who's convinced that governance is everything, and it includes data quality, where I don't normally put that in there. And so it's a broad church, it's data governance, and it includes lots of things. And for me, it's executing some kind of external control on a project or on data, and in this case, technical build. So it's kind of trying to create that assurance around that, so that you're building quality either in the project level or at the data level or at the technical level itself. And you can't separate them totally, right? What's the distinction between technical governance and data governance? Well, there's slightly different remits, but I think we typically are used to the sort of governance of people, governance processes around agreeing the definitions of things and stuff like that. Less so on the technical governance. That tends to be left to the engineers do it and it's good and we test it and that's it. So I'm talking about a separate expert team that's there to do that in that case.
Mm.
But you're right, it all intertwines with each other very much.
Mm. And if I remember correctly, we had a quality governance team, but then there was also this larger organizational data governance team as well.
Yeah.
So, what was the sort of segregation of responsibilities across those two
Yeah, I
divisions?
mean the data governance team we had was very much out there working with the business. So like you couldn't. I'm not saying I've got to be extreme, but technical governance really wouldn't go out in the light. They're checking stuff, whereas someone needs to be working with the business around the meaning of data and working. Who's the owner? The data is typically owned. Well, it might be owned by the citizenry in the case of the government, or it might be the customers in case of in the case of a commercial organization. It might be them that own the data, or it might be the business that owns the data, but sure as hell ain't the IT team or the data team. So you need to work with those really important stakeholders. So that's where I think that governance team work. And they're really important for the developers, right? Forging that relationship with the business is incredibly important, not just from taking requirements, but they're an actor. They understand the business processes and they understand the data itself sometimes. And so you got to work with them, and they make decisions, right? Only the business can affect a change in the process, really. So that's that side, and that's very much the data governance. So that's why we had sort of two layers. But I think the skill set's very different.
Yeah. And when we talk about data quality, it's an interesting one because we faced all sorts of challenges, and I am sure that this applies to every organization. But, I remember the classic discussions around we have 10 different interpretations of date. So, which date is important for this process? And trying to go down the rabbit hole with the business to try and work out which date is the right date to use in this particular algorithm or set of reporting. But then there was just, your common quality issues that we came up against all the time. So tell me a little bit about those things and how they impacted the work that we do.
I mean, the reason why you get in the situation you get in half the time is because you actually don't understand the data and you make decisions about the data. And when you bind it into an integrated data model, you think you know what it is and you don't, and so or it might be a slightly different thing, and so there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. And the data quality teams are unfortunately they've got data quality and data governance teams. Sometimes they know way more than the business does, but they've still got to engage the business, right? I mean, business tends to see the happy light. Oh, this is where the process works. This is a thinking. What's wrong with what does this data say? So then, ooh, really? Whoops. So it's a really interesting relationship between the business and those people that understand the data. And certainly back in the T-Mobile days, some of the most valuable people to the business were the data warehouse people, because they truly knew the process really well, because they'd got evidence of how the process worked, right? Because it was all in the data warehouse, and it doesn't quite work like that. And so I thought that was a really positive thing that my technical architects were called out by the business when they were doing something new to advise them on how things
Yeah.
worked and stuff like that. I always say the people that know the data and know the process best are the data quality people, because all they're doing is checking the bad bits. And they're the edge
Yeah.
cases that people don't really know about. Oh, it doesn't quite work like that, does it? And because they're the things that go wrong, not the bread and butter stuff. That tends to work, but it's the stuff. Oh, but then you think it works like that, but it actually doesn't. In the X percentage of cases, it can do this thing. And so they're
Yeah.
really good at understanding the nuances of the data.
Fantastic. Now, I apologize because I have just given you a heap of off the cuff questions that you were not um, prepared for. But can I ask you one last thing? And I just want to touch on this. I will probably touch on it a bit later, but I wanted to talk to you about decision making. So we get through all of that technical difficulty in developing these solutions, and then we go and present them to the business. What's been your experience of how receptive is the business to receiving that and actually making decisions? Because it's a hell of an investment to go through this process and it takes an extraordinary amount of time to get it right. Um, have you found, that businesses really embrace what they're seeing and use that to drive really good decision making? Or have you found that for the most part it's really challenging for them?
Yeah, definitely challenging. I mean, I always start off by saying, there's people have written books and stuff on data for decision making. I say that's not the key thing here. So I always say, oh, I make a decision regularly to drink less, but it never actually happens. I don't affect the change, and so you've got to
Yeah.
affect the change. Make a decision is all well and good, but are you the person changing the process? Are you the person tapping things in? Are you the person doing that thing? And so I think there's a lot of loss between the point, even an executive, if it's an executive, makes a decision and the affecting of the change off the back of that decision. It starts and ends with the process. Think of the process. In fact, I talk a lot more about process nowadays than I do data, because it's so important that the people understand that it's about the process. So decisions. So are the business reluctant? I think it's symptomatic of us not really on starting at the end. and working backwards and going, well, what sort of change are we going to try to affect, and what do we need, the outcomes we need, and all of that stuff, and really understanding all of that. We go, oh yeah, we've got a big warehouse, and look how fast it runs. We bring the data in, and we do this, we do all that heavy lifting before, and then it may or may not meet the need. I always talk about some really expensive report that got built, and it looked really good and everything like that, and then the customer said, I didn't need to know whether it went up or down. Well, you've got lots of special widdly diddlies that do all these charts and stuff like that. I only needed to know up or down. It's like less or more before. It's like so actually really understanding that end, and what are they, who is going to do what is really important. And in fact, you were working with me when we got asked to do real time reporting about something, and when I said, well, okay, you want real time reporting on this. How long does it take you to actually respond to that? So this was network building stuff. We wanted to know the performance of the network. Excellent. Like about 6 months. 6 months. You want real time reporting for something that you can only react to in a period of 6
In 6
months.
months.
And so that's what I'm talking about there. It's really, and that's why I talk about the governance and the importance of really getting really close to the business and understanding that stuff. You can stop an awful lot of unnecessary work if you really get in bed with the business and really understand what they're trying to do and be a strategic advisor to them. I think that's really a
Yes.
valuable asset for data people.
And I think you cannot overemphasize that enough, because if I remember correctly, one of the worst outcomes, I mean, when I say worst, I mean disheartening. One of the most disheartening outcomes was when we would finally present the reporting suite that had been built, and people would say, oh, okay, but now that we know this, we need to know this extra bit
Isn't that every time?
in order to.
You must be disheartened every time then.
It was almost heartbreaking, because it was almost felt like I can never actually close a project because I suspect we're going to be coming back. What we underestimate about humanity is the fact that we are constantly evolving through information. So what's happening is, if you present to me how many Band-Aids are in the drawer, my next decision is, well, how many Band-Aids do I need to sustain a good level of Band-Aids? And now I want you to go and measure that. And I want you to measure, well, who in the house is using Band-Aids to understand what size I should buy, and blah, blah, blah. So I think that's the whole difficulty with these kinds of reporting systems. I think one of the things that I recognised through the work that we did together was the more malleable you can, if that's the right word, that you can create these systems, the better off you'll be, because this concept that we iterate through information is really important to be able to go and say, don't close that job, because I bet you any money we're going to come back and get to the next level of reporting questions after that, if that makes sense.
Totally agree. And that's a lot about, and maybe we'll talk about it later, about your project manager comes in, delivers to a point in time, right? And then they're off. And and actually it doesn't stop like that. Then my project plan might have said that, and it might have still delivered an outcome, but then there's this duty of care care that carries on afterwards. But I think that's good. I mean, I think whenever that happened, providing it wasn't, oh, it's completely the wrong thing you built here, providing that was great, but now can we have that, did tell me they were actually using it, which I think is the greatest danger, that they don't know how to use it, and they don't really find it useful. So the thirst for more is really good. As a project manager, you probably hate that, but as a person trying to engage the business, I personally like that.
You love it.
So different perspectives.
And one last question before I go back to it, and I apologise, because all of a sudden now I'm thinking to myself, so when you and I were working together 15 years ago, it was a very different infrastructure and product suite that was on offer. I mean, I remember us rebuilding Cognos reports and things of that nature, right? The technology stack was very different, and now it has evolved significantly. When you look at how the technology is evolving in data warehousing, is it giving you more flexibility? Like, is that where the market is going? And especially now with AI being introduced to the stack, like, how do you, if you had to describe the evolution of this infrastructure, how would you describe it?
I think it's definitely had a positive impact, but not as big an impact as everyone would have you. I mean, you got to remember where a lot of the hype comes from, the people selling you the thing that does the thing, right? So back in the days in T-Mobile, it was really expensive to load our call records, and that had an impact on us, not big, kind of flying blind to a degree, because the amount of disks you needed to spin up to hold this stuff was a lot. And we had Telco's created enormous data warehouses with all those billions of call records. It takes up a lot of space. So I think that the cost price has come down a lot, certainly for storage and stuff like that. But actually, I was reflecting on it, going, really, 20 years ago, we were using, a Netezza appliance with business objects sitting over the front. Is it radically different? It's not fundamentally different today. I mean, what's difficult today is still the things that were difficult back then around understanding the data, the metadata, that kind of side of it. So now we've got monster machines that can process stuff really quickly, and there are certain use cases that require that. I mean, there's certain things we couldn't do with a traditional relational database that now the new technologies could do really well. So some of that's happened. So I think I'd say in general, yes, it's moved the needle a lot, but then that is quite a long time for that to happen. So it certainly didn't happen overnight, and it's moved things along. And then there's other spaces. I do a lot of work in data quality. I'm not sure that's moved on. Maybe those challenges are just too difficult. I don't know. I mean, some vendors might get upset with that, but honestly, it's not dead easy yet.
I'm not surprised that data quality is becoming more difficult because data is becoming enormous and more complex. Would that be true?
No,
Or do you
because
think
I
it's
don't.
not really?
Honestly, 20 odd years ago, we were loading 1 million transactions a second, I think it was. So the
Wow.
boxes were fast even in those days for what you need. And I don't know whether that's ever been the constraining factor. Yeah, but we used to talk about disk I/O being a real big issue. There were some issues around the technology, but honestly, I think there's the bigger problems are, is anyone actually using this? Is this the right thing that they need? And I think that's where maybe we'll talk about the AI. I think it seismically shifted the relationship between the end consumer and the data itself. That's a different relationship. Whereas before, yeah, we're faster in everything, but it was still a blooming report that comes out the end of it. And can you spot the difference between the 20-year-old business objects report and the new Power BI version? Possibly. Radically different? I would say so. I'm trying to be a bit, maybe that's controversial. People will be shouting at the screen, but honestly, I don't know. Yeah, some bits have changed a lot, but yeah, but some things have moved very slowly because they are probably just really difficult things. Wherever it relates to a human being, then you get in the slow lane, right? And that's really tricky, and there's a particular skill set to deal with human beings, and so that slows it down. Your machines may run fast, but the relationships with the business is always going to be an interesting and analog challenge, I suppose.
That is such a true thing. All right. In some of our recent discussions, you mentioned that people's incentives, so whether they're driven by projects versus BAU or external contractors versus internal stakeholders, all of this can create these diverse perspectives. How do these differing motivations impact data project outcomes, and how can teams align more effectively?
I think the first thing is you got to recognize that happens. People live in a sort of fool's paradise that, like, are you sure all these actor groups are aligned in what they want to do? And, now I've gone to the other side and I'm not on the business side, I'm on the consulting side. I now know how hard it is for vendors, right? The expectations are wild and you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and stuff like that. So the project managers are driving the vendors to come in on time and cost. And yet when they open this thing up, oh my word, this is far worse than we thought it was. And you think, oh, that's like the mechanic, right? Oh, you need to change your whatever special waffle valve on the engine and stuff like that. That's the sort of belief on the business side. So I think going in there, understanding what the differing parties are going to be. And I'm very vocal with project managers and I have had pretty good debates with some really good project managers and I'm saying you sit between everyone else in the business, and you're largely driven to do time and cost, and get projects in on time and to the cost, and And yet we're more interested in making sure there's a quality outcomes and quality extensible solution so we don't break this thing going forward. And you're putting us under incredible pressure. So I think and then the business, do they really care? They want this thing and they need to get to say it's a report, and hopefully it isn't, say it was. That's what they want. Do they care that it scatters everything else? So we have to break things to get them to get to that? They don't care that. They're not, they're not malicious, but they are really as folks. So you've got all these competing things, and sooner or later, I think you've got to stand your ground and say, we can't do this. This will have a very long term detrimental effect. And so that's why you need that balance between those people that want to get things done now to time and cost, and other people that want to go, it'll have too much harm. No, we can't do that. And like, I'm a vendor now, so you want to leave your client with the impression that you're on the same page as them, but you can't be entirely. And you can try to do that. You can't be totally.
Interesting. So, in a previous discussion as well, we talked about the need for an exit strategy and assuming failure to identify weak points early. So, can you share a specific example from your experience where planning for failure helped a project, or conversely, where the lack of such planning led to challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to go in with got to understand the sort of space you're playing in. I think, and an example, one use case or whatever came up, I'm going to say hundreds of thousands, tens of millions probably, involved in this process that we could fix. And I should have spotted early that it was going to be bad because two other groups had a go at it. And what was the difference? When I'd got bigger machines and 3 PhD machine learning people, we could solve this problem. No, we couldn't, because we didn't really understand the problem. Really, we understood that we wanted to do that and stuff, but we didn't know sense of how uncertain our understanding of this situation was. And it was a complex problem to solve, and we were using the wrong techniques to solve complex problems. I didn't have an exit strategy or anything. I just went in there. I used the sort of analogy with Afghanistan. It's very easy to get in there, and you go in with the hubris of, oh, I've got all this machinery and everything like that. But maybe it's more difficult than you want. And the Russians and the British had a go at it. They didn't come out of there with any success either. So I think going in there all guns blazing with all your hardware and stuff isn't the answer to something. What I'm saying is it gave off those signs, right? What did I think? Did I think they were just not as good as me? Or had less hardware than me, or didn't have the 3 PhD people? No, they were good as well. It's just that they stumbled over the same thing we ultimately stumbled over. That was a big lesson for me.
So, do you think that in that particular scenario, it was a failure to acknowledge and investigate
Yeah.
previous lessons learned? Or do you think, had you spent more time in ideation and just researching the problem in more detail, you would have either logically gotten to the position of, we're never going to know enough to be able to crack this nut, or we actually just need to spend a year just thoroughly researching and analysing this before we enter into the concept of we're going to deliver something?
I do think, I mean, research, I think, is the way to do it. I think going in there, if you look at the sort of Cynefin framework, which talks about these simple cause and effect and complicated and complex and chaotic systems, if it's truly a complex system, there's ways of means of going about solving problems in that space. But that involves going in there and understanding the system. But I think you've got to have a go at it with the data, try to solve a piece of it, try and understand how that works and stuff like that. So it's more of a hands-on research than it is a theoretical research. I think you've got to go in there and put boots on the ground and do stuff. And ultimately, that's what happened, right? So they took what was a hideously complex process, decomposed it, and solved bits of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's ways and means of doing it, and that's okay. I was very comfortable with that. I've spoken about it lots of times since. I try a different approach, really, and certainly not very large. If this thing feels really large, you're probably going to have problems with it. And so there's
Yeah.
a bunch of characteristics I carry into new projects. It's large, and several of the people that I go at it, it's probably going to be beyond you as well. So then decompose it, see what you can do. Not every problem's decomposable like that, but I think I'd certainly do a lot more work up front. But then it's probably the first project we did, right? And we went in there with hubris, with these massive machines and these massively brained individuals, and we thought we could solve anything. Well, turns out you can't, but we learned from it.
At least you're still laughing. That's a good thing.
Oh no, you always should always learn from stuff. You're crikey if you do, That's
Correct,
important.
correct. But I do love what you say because I think I was actually saying this at a function last night. The one thing that I actually love about agile delivery methods is the concept that you break things down into
Yeah.
its smallest pieces in order to be able to um, execute more safely. And I see this with projects quite a lot now where we go in with these massive intentions, massive scopes, and we want to eat the entire elephant. And I've got a feeling actually it was one of our colleagues all those years ago from a consulting organization who actually said you need to just start with one toenail from the elephant, not try and
Yeah.
eat the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the most valuable lessons that you can learn, I think, knowing then when to start the more complex ones whilst you work your way through smaller, you know, um, smaller minimum viable
Yeah.
products, as you work your way through a problem, I think is very sound
I
advice.
think, but sorry,
And
can I
learning.
just add to that? Sorry, just jump in before I lose the thread on this one. I think agile can be dangerous as well. One of our agile consultants said the big drawback to agile is solution coherence, and that you can, if you can chop this thing into small pieces and solve for that, still may not mean right. So I think the
Mm,
whole message I would be giving is understand the kind of problem space you're doing and think logically and structurally, not belief based, but some sort of science behind it, and they run your experiments and stuff. But recognizing that even breaking it down still might not work, depending on the problem you're trying
mm,
to solve. So you might have
mm,
got a piece of it, but in of itself, it doesn't mean anything because the end-to-end process had to be dealt with, right? And as it turns out, this particular problem, they did break pieces off and they did solve those problems, and they were still valuable in of themselves, but not everything's like that.
yep.
Anyway, so
It doesn't suit
it doesn't
everything.
suit
You have
everything,
to
no.
really think
And I
through
think
the
the
method.
best people
Yeah.
that use any of these methodologies, and Agile being one of them, are the ones that know its limitations and know what to watch for. And that's what I've learned in the data space. It's like you know what to watch for. You go, this smells like this other thing we did. Tread carefully, everybody. So there we go.
Okay. Awesome. So, when we were chatting last time as well, you made a compelling distinction between governance and assurance, noting that assurance is about being in the flow and actively looking for failure points versus that traditional project governance, which tends to sit squarely outside the project and aims to govern cost and time. And it's less interested in the technical assurance and excellence. So, how can organisations implement robust assurance processes to catch issues early, especially in complex data warehousing projects?
I can barely keep my eyes open when people start talking about governance. Really, we got to talk to customers about this because this is. Um,
Hugely
I know.
boring.
Can we just change its name and flip it in the same, but just call it something? That needs a relaunch. Um, and
Yeah.
and that's because, and then people go, "Oh, you're so naive, Joe." That's not what it is, and I get that. But I think it's a bad emphasis, and there is a lot of emphasis on people signing off and processes for that, and that's so slow. You use humans as a last resort in many regards if you can, because they're very hard to scale. And so it's really important. But I think we've got to be careful we don't give them things that we should be doing elsewhere, should do a different way. Use them sparingly, and because it's not really terribly interesting for them. I think one of the agile consultants said, and I've quoted him a lot. He said, "You sit in your steering committee and you're inspecting it. You're trying to inspect it, and that's not the way you do it. You build it in." So I think that's where the sort of technical governance is ensuring that we build it in, and then you've probably got less to check on the other side of it. So I think that's the distinction. That's why I like I use now. I've tried to migrate to assurance so that people don't know I'm coming with governance. I'm now calling it something else. But yeah, I think we've always got to be really careful that my criticism of the data governance people in the past is um, you know, do they put yourself in the shoes of the person you're asking to do this? Do they enjoy that? Is it really, are they the only, and it's not it hasn't been very engaging, or I would argue very effective in many regards. So I think when anything's like that, it may be the only answer. That way will we do it, but I think we should always be looking for a better way of doing it. And so that what we should be doing is trying to delight customers rather than drag them into stuff that they don't enjoy, nor do we. So but yeah, but I think you can design and build in a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be checked later so much. Is my answer. Try to
Right.
do that. Don't inspect it in. Design and build it in. So
Very good. One of your key points was the need to sort of step back and thoroughly understand the problem, including edge cases, which was really interesting because I'm a massive fan of Rory Sutherland. And he makes this classic point about the fact that organizations tend to build solutions for the mean. So they place lots of importance on customers that are sort of in that central tendency. And they often don't acknowledge the needs of edge case consumers, which can be a costly mistake. So, how do you approach that practice and what safeguards can teams put in place to avoid missing critical edge cases?
This one, I haven't the foggiest idea how you answer this question because it's really hard. I've been backwards and forwards in the thought process on this one, right? Because on the one hand, you go, well, what's the norm? Isn't that the important stuff for the business that align to the business strategy? Aren't we supposed to be helping them with that? Who makes this decision about what we are prioritizing? The business. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
But then you go, yeah, but we're also trying to excite and educate them and demonstrate and helping them in things they may not know about and stuff like that. So I think I'm seeing this. This is happening in AI a lot. I think where, and I think the answer is it's probably not your mainstream job. But if you don't get on with it now, and then the business goes, that edge case has now become mainstream. You go, I haven't tried it. I've got no experience of this stuff. So you better start doing that. That was to a degree where we were, where big data was becoming a thing. I was letting the team start to use the technologies because when it came to us and we finally got told we had to do it, like, oh, we should do it. We said, yeah, excellent. We're already started. And there's no substitute for that sort of grazing your knees, experimenting and working on stuff like that. So I think there's probably two things you always need to carve space out for resources. One is that necessary experimentation, because that's about learning and educating, and then you can be an advisor to the business off the back of it. And then the other one is refactoring. So just constantly doing your housekeeping, right? And I always say it's like servicing your car. It's not a new function, but it's necessary. And so those things should command some of your attention, not just the mainstream stuff in the middle, as you say. And they're interesting stuff as well. I mean, if you go into any data warehouse team or lakehouse team and say, who wants to do some experimentation on this new stuff? It's like there's a volley of hands go up and everyone's up for that one. And I think that's a necessary part of keeping people engaged with the organization as well. Yeah, we'll get the chance to push the boundaries on some things for both for the business and for the data team as well. It's like, we do work in an exciting arena, but if you're told now you've just got to build more Cognos reports, sooner or later you won't be working for you.
Yeah, this is true. I remember one of the teams that we had actually, we had some data scientists and we were working through a major pitch at that point and we'd been working on it for 4 or 5 months. But I remember one of the data scientists coming in and said, guess what I've discovered from all of this data that I've been looking into? And like that was the most exciting thing to happen in 6 months. We were all absolutely
Mm.
thrilled at what this man had discovered just purely through play and experimentation with the
Mm.
data. He had managed to find insights that no one had even known and no one would have understood was meaningful had we not
Mm.
sort of stumbled across it just purely through experimentation. So I do believe that you are right. Um, anyway, complex systems and machine learning. Now, I have another off script question for you. I was
You're hardly
talking
ever on
to
the
a
script here.
very. It's bad. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry.
Um, um, we have a mutual friend, and I was talking to them about AI, and I said, "Oh, um, I'd like you to come and do something for me." And he said, "Daniela, I'm not going to do that." And "Oh, okay, why?" And he said, "I'm not a believer in AI." He said, "Daniela, I've been around way too long. I've seen big data, I've seen machine learning, I've seen this, I've seen that. All of them promised to do something amazing and never achieved anything. So I'm not buying into all of this AI stuff." And it was kind of interesting because when I look back over all of those technologies that you and I have met and seen over the past 20 years, I actually think that there is this natural iterative cycle that was actually necessary for us to get to where we are today. Would you agree with that or disagree with the evolution of all of the
Was it
technologies
natural?
we've
I don't know
seen?
whether we could we have spotted it. Probably people cleverer than me and people have a lot of the sort of maths is stuff that's been waiting for the technology to catch up, certainly in machine learning and stuff, to be able to process that stuff. But now I would say that I'm thinking it's really different. As I said right at the beginning, I think AI is different. Most of what you're talking about are back end technology stuff. And like, does a business care when your machines run faster? I mean, they probably care when they run really slowly, but like whether it's more cost effective or not, yes, in some way, but often that's funded out of IT and this, that, and the other, and maybe the projects are a bit cheaper or whatever. I don't think it's really got close to the customer, but now that is changing. So let me give you an example. I'm doing some consulting with a council. Great, they're really good. I went into whatever it was, Copilot. No, it was Copilot, whatever. And I asked it some questions about, I said, give me the FOI request, for freedom of information request, number, and in the last couple of, there was a reason I wanted to do that. Anyway, so I went to look at it, and of course, it returns the answer. And being me, being a data quality person, I went to check it. Structure was right, data's wrong. Then I went to another one, and another foundation model, when did that same story, structure right, data wrong. Then went through, I did 4 of them. All of them were wrong. All of them were plausible, but they were wrong. I think we've got it's not overnight going to change everything, but there's ways and means we have to deal with it. But it will become the new way of doing it. So what I was saying to them is, if you don't watch it, we don't make the data available in a way that these engines can consume them. People make the wrong inference because they're not looking at your websites anymore. That expensive, it looks great. Let's got lovely pictures of the whole area and stuff like that. They ain't going there. It's 0 click now. They ain't clicking. They want the answer. And that answer is the worst kind of answer because it's plausible but wrong. And so, I mean, it's inconsequential when it comes to freedom of information. In this particular case, I was just using an example. But we've got to change the way we work as data people to make sure they get better outcomes from it, because it's so compelling as a proposition that I don't need to look at your flipping reports anymore. I just need to ask this thing a question. We've got to recognize it's way too compelling to be ignored, and that we need to make sure we work with it to enable it, I think. And so,
Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do exactly the same thing. I will always go and research my articles, and then I will try and pull something together, and then I will put it into a different AI, and I will say, can you check this and can you check the citations for me? And it's really interesting how often it is wrong. And I think it comes back to what we were discussing earlier about that middle ground. Well, someone said this to me, that it's regurgitating what it's already heard multiple times.
yeah, of course it is.
So if that is actually the case, it is feeding you data that is the middle grade between wrong and right, if that makes sense.
I think for certain things, it's using large numbers of stuff to sort of even out. So we go and how do we do it as human beings? We go and look at something, and then that we tend to think that's right and da da da. But it can go really wide, and then it sort of takes the average of those, which is probably most right, because of these peaks and
Right.
troughs, it just evens it out to one particular thing. I think when it comes
Yep.
to um, the data itself and things like that. So when we, it's great, isn't it? For those of us that don't like writing stuff and prefer numbers, it's just marvelous, marvelous. But when it comes to the numbers, I think we've got to be a lot more diligent in the data that is made available for this thing to read. So I saw someone
Yeah.
yesterday going, if we get it to look at all our data, then you're going to get some interesting answers from this thing, and like you would a human being. But now
Yes.
so this is where the data quality finally is now getting its time in the sun. Because if you can get that data right once, and it's like this and nice, and it's served in a way that it can do it, it's less likely to make mistakes about it. Because how would you do that when you're looking across lots of competing stuff? The worst thing about the AI is
Yes.
that when it hallucinates, it's very plausible in the way it hallucinates. Well, we tend to go as human beings, I don't
Yeah.
know, I'm completely confused. Like, it doesn't, and you think, you can tell it
No.
to stop. To stop trying to make stuff up, but it's not easy. Well, in
No.
my experience, it's not easy. I mean, I'm not an expert by any stretch of imagination.
All right. Beautiful. Um, you also highlighted some challenges with vendors being managed based on time and cost rather than quality, which can lead to subpar solutions. So, what strategies have you found to be effective for holding vendors accountable and ensuring quality in outsourced data projects?
So I remember back in the days, we'd got a new project office person, and she'd got a PhD in project management. And she said, we're really going to tighten up on this stuff. When I looked at it, it was all rigor around time and cost. It wasn't about quality, because that's really hard, right? It's like 1,000 times more difficult than the other two added together. Most people could have a stab at, was it on time, and within budget and stuff. But the rest of it, that's hard, right? And so, sure, I mean, we're really going to clamp down on it. So that's very laudable. But where are you going to back slippage through? Which will happen because it's uncertain.
Yes. Yes.
You've got to back it through quality, right? They'll be hard coded the hell out of this thing,
Yeah.
because that's the last thing I want. So I think it's building projects. You've got to build projects for failure as well. And so, several times I've had things where they go, well, when's the end of the project? When does the project manager stand down? When the project's delivered on the 31st of the month, when it goes in, you go, well, we'll have a 2 years afterwards bedding this thing in, and they're well out of here. And so I think that structuring projects to recognize that there is this bedding in, this hypercare period, there's this. I mean, people do that, right? But we often don't budget correctly for it. But I think the other problem you're talking about is we treat some of the vendors in an unrealistic way, right? Would we have made the same mistake as they did? Did they fully understand exactly what could possibly have gone wrong? So I think, it's going in there knowing that things will go wrong and having a plan for how we're going to do that. So that's why I like the sort of solution lead to be doing the assurance work, and them to stand up with the project manager. There's too many projects I've seen where the project manager is controlling all the dialogue of the steering committee, and there's nobody going, and then they're trying to get, because they're going to be out of here when it's finished, and they're only going to be marked on two things, time and cost, and then they're out of here. And someone needs to be the counter voice. And so that's where your assurance lead should be going, no, this is bad. If you put this thing in, it's going to be nasty. So I think it's, anyway, that's my view of that world.
I think there's a couple of things that happens with project managers. Number one, there's a lot of positivity bias and the planning fallacies when we actually develop plans. And we have this unfortunate perspective that everything is going to be a straight line to delivery. And that is often not how it works, especially in data projects. So there is definitely something in there about planning for and having contingency for learning through problems that you are inevitably going to face that you do not even realize are going to occur when you are planning things out. And I think, Flyberg, I should say, talks about this quite a lot in his books, where he talks about sort of, the concept of reference class data. What have we actually learnt through other projects like these that can give us an indication of a better way to plan? Because once again, I talk about this all the time, just our sheer failure to be able to learn. This year, I am not going to be the first project manager to make a mistake on this kind of project. There are lots of people that I can consult with prior to doing my planning that can give me some really good indications of where things go wrong and planning for that. Does that make sense?
I'm completely with you. In fact, I was trying to push an approach that was saying, well, a project's just collecting data points, right? And what do? We build a model, right? A prediction model.
Yes.
I'm trying to predict
Yes.
whether this project's going to go in or not. So how do you work? What's the data you build your prediction model off? Yeah, previous projects. So codify them, build a prediction model, and whatever. And that's how we found out that the most important person in doing that exercise, the most important determinant of success in a data project, was getting access to a SME. And everyone thought it was, business engagement. Yeah, it is, but it's this particular thing that's the issue. But I got a lot of pushback from people. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. It's boring. So you're data people. You don't want to gather data on a project. Well, it's not the same thing. Yes, it is.
I think it's actually one of the biggest failings of our entire industry, because if I look back over my entire career, not one organisation has collected structured data about its past projects that informs its future successes and failings. None. And it is one of the fundamental reasons why our industry has not been able to progress as far as improvements in success rates, because we just fail to learn from the past. And even worse than that, the data is there. It is all there in documents, in emails, in messages, all those kinds of things, and yet we do not use it for proactive purposes. And I think it's a real failing. But I hope one day I will meet a leadership team that will say, go and build that, Daniela, and let's use that to improve our outcomes. And I'd be absolutely rapt. That would be my cup of tea. All right. So when we were discussing this episode of Powering Projects, you mentioned a project experience where 50% of the development time and the sprints was often going towards remediating technical debt, which was not accounted for in the original estimates. So what steps can teams take upfront to minimize technical debt and ensure that data warehouses remain valuable long-term assets?
Well, it's probably everything we've said beforehand, right? Which is having this sort of final quality assurance thing around the technical governance team, and then making sure that all the projects report out the technical compromises that have been made, and that we factor in the work to refactor that stuff. It's also about allowing flexibility in the project. So I'm a firm believer that project managers should drive hard on time and cost, but they also need a release hatch in terms of just make, because you can't compromise that. So that's structuring everything in a way that means you can hold your ground on the quality side of it. I think that's inevitable to a certain degree. Whether it's 50%, you hear it a lot, that 50% of the work is, and that's something that IT people typically struggle to understand, because they do a lot of, IT is now works isolation, right? Microservices, everything's isolated from each other. So you can make a mess here and it kind of may not bleed across to anything else. Well, we've got this heavily integrated thing where everything is, well, most things are codependent on each other. So then you start building, you're going to be reliant on stuff that somebody else did before. And in a way, you're probably not. And I think that's something that's unique. So people say, why is it so hard? Well, it's why are IT trying to isolate stuff? Because you don't want to be in the space we're in. And so that's why you get a lot of that stuff. And it might have even been reasonably fit for purpose for the thing that the person originally wanted to do. And you
Yes.
still need to do that. So I think does that fall into that? We'll just expect it won't be as good as you think it is. My dad's a builder, and he said, if you kick your builder out, be very careful, because any new builder will add at least 25%, maybe more, to the rest of the job, because they just don't know what mess they're going to inherit. And they get lucky if the builder preceding them was okay, but they've got to cater for the fact it won't be. And that's why I think everyone's got to accept that just, going into anything, just you should be asking yourself, well, how can this go wrong? And you're right, a lot of people just
Yeah.
think very positively about things, and they don't assume that, well, have I got enough in here to understand if this isn't what I think it is. So.
And that's the reason why I love that principle around think slow, act
Mm.
fast. The whole concept is that the more time that you spend researching, and the reason I bring this up is, many years ago I was involved in a project whereby we did a data center refresh and they asked us to scope it all, but we'd never actually looked under the hood of the data center. There was this, there was this uh, business leader perspective that said, you must know because you're infrastructure specialists. And it's like, no, 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 we've never looked under the hood of your environment,
Mm.
right? We really do not know what's under there. And it's the same thing with a house. Walk into my house, the walls look good, the carpet's in place. You assume that everything under the hood is all going to look magical and perfect, but that is not true at all. And it's exactly the same with data
Mm.
projects. You got no idea what's under there until you start getting in there and getting your hands dirty. And there's a certain amount of, in my experience now, I would heavily encourage some seed funding to go in and actually do a deep dive into what's there before you start planning anything out, and then still try and be as conservative as
Yeah,
possible
I'm with you.
with your estimation and
Yeah, I'm
planning.
totally with you. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, you're right. You've got it's actually getting your doing that sort of iterative approach, but really making sure you do some deep dive data. But it's just so unhuman, right? It's like our instinct is to get in and get going, and you got to resist that thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you need those
You
diverse
do.
people in your team, right? And diversity is a really important thing, because there's those people that will go, quality assurance people that will just go, no, 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 no. And
Yeah.
slow people up, but everyone wants just to get in and get going, and especially the devs and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
important. But the project managers are the ones patrolling a lot of that stuff as well, and so then they need to make sure it's given
Correct.
the right
Correct.
kudos.
Correct. And I talk to people about this all the time because I see project managers feel so much personal value that comes through the projects that we lead, that we want them to start as quickly as possible. We want to feel that I am being of value, I am being of purpose. Quickly, let's get this project started. when in fact that's probably the worst thing you can do, because when you walk into a scenario without assessing the risks properly, without really understanding the environment, you are absolutely going to run into issues that you should have known better just purely by pause and check. Let's have a look at this properly. Let's scrutinize what we're doing, and not be too
But I wonder how
hasty.
many
So I
humans
agree.
beings think that way, though, right? We're not
They
programmed to
don't.
think in that way. We're
Nope.
not programmed to, or it's not most people. It isn't their style. I mean, in fact, I'm very much like that, right? I've been working on a data quality project, and I was talking to one of the engineers that works with me. He says, "It's always wrong, Julian. The data quality, right? Of course it is. But we are very cynical data quality people. It's like, I don't care what you're thinking. We've never seen it yet, so we're not likely to see it's all perfectly clean data." But you learn that, right, from bitter experience, whereas a lot of people don't really. They don't have that over and over again. Oh my, it's always wrong. So we said, if it's right, it's definitely wrong. So if two numbers agree, they're either the same thing or that something's gone wrong. So there we go.
All right. So you advocated for small iterative experiments when it comes to AI and new technology. So how should teams structure those experiments to maximize their learning while minimizing risks in large scale data projects?
My son's very scientific, right? Did science at university and stuff, and now he's in medicine. But the scientific method and the ways that they do these things and how they prove them, they try to falsify them all the time. It's not really a thing unless it can be falsifiable. So it's really understanding that you are going into an experiment and stuff. So I've seen an organization running some experiments with AI, and then you think, well, where's that go? And so one of the developers has got a very good understanding of how this particular thing goes, but it's like how you democratizing that understanding, and they haven't thought about how they're going to capture it. So it's good for him, but has he explained it well, or have we got that stuff? So I think being clear that this is an experiment and our objective primarily is to learn, and if you can codify that, like we're talking about the projects, right? In many regards, they're just experiments as well. And hopefully they're successful ones, but they're all part of this building this corpus of knowledge. And same with the experiments, right? But so what's your approach to gathering those learnings in a structured way so that other people can use it, or else you're just educating one person who might not stay. Especially if they get good at AI, they
Yeah.
probably won't stay. So I think that's it. It's
Yeah.
just really going through a learning process that's way more structured in terms of just farming it for what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. And this is really interesting too, because this plays into another human factor where traditionally the vendor will want to have boots on the ground as quickly as possible. So they have a vested interest in
Yeah.
wanting to start projects as quickly as possible, without potentially sometimes doing a lot of the due diligence that they need to do to make sure that they've got things right. But this is another one of those classic examples where it is very hard to convince a group of business leaders that learning and iterating is so important, and understanding what doesn't work is just as important as understanding what does work. And we need to give ourselves space to learn through those
Mm,
things and take some calculated risks,
mm.
right? There has to be some investment that goes to, we tried that and we know it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And now through that
Yeah.
learning, we've been able to go into a different direction and iterate in a different way. And that's all so valuable. But it's really hard to convince a leadership team to fund that. And, what's been your experience with that?
No, I mean, I certainly do fund that. I think as part, as I was saying before, it's like you need to do the experiment work and you need to do the refactoring stuff. They're just what you just need to
Yeah.
do,
They're
because you
equally as
need to
important.
you need
Yeah.
to stretch people. All of this good stuff needs to happen, and I think good leaders will kind of get that. But again, that's what we talked about, those incentives, right? It's not that they're antagonistic, but they do have those narrow, and you just need to get that done. Can you experiment on someone else's watch? It's a really hard one, and I think that's depends why your funding works. I'm a firm believer that the funding should sit with the business, because I don't want to build stuff or do stuff for them that they don't care about. And that's some measure of their buy-in. It's not a great measure because in some organisations they can sign the funding off relatively straightforwardly. But I think you've got to get skin in the game.
Yeah. Lack of access to business SMEs was also a recurring issue across the industry. So, how do you suggest that project and business leaders ensure that they have the right expertise available at the right time? And what should they do when SMEs are unavailable to participate in
Easy.
projects?
Stop. Stop.
Yeah.
Sorry that I didn't finish off the last one. What happened to fail fast? Everyone just goes, "Oh, you can't do that because you're encouraging failure." You're being realistic. It's the fast bit that's the bit the message you're supposed to get from that was, we won't spend a lot of money on it, but we recognise we all fail. So then everyone says, "Oh, it's not fashionable anymore. You can't talk about that. We don't want to be encouraging failure." You're not encouraging failure. You're saying you will inevitably fail, and let's make that nice and fast. So
Yes.
I couldn't understand why people got off disliked that when I thought it was, you know, made sense.
I think it's got something to do with the way culture is evolving in organisations, and I think it potentially has commenced with the whole concepts around DEI. I'm finding a lot of organisations now, it's not acceptable to give people feedback,
Oh,
and it's very difficult to
wow.
have very sort of honest conversations around, how things are going. And I think it's part of that whole movement that we don't want to talk about failure because we don't want people to think that they have failed and not feel happy about themselves and what they've done.
Mhm.
But I think the real problem is that in not talking about failure, what we're not doing is
Yeah.
celebrating our failures and being able to say, I know that that doesn't work, or it didn't work for us because of A, B, and C. And if we had instead done E, F, and G, we might have been successful. So let's try
Yeah.
that in the next iteration and stop doing the A, B, C stuff, which doesn't work. And that would,
Well, that's the
help
role of
enormously.
leadership,
So I would
right?
agree.
It's setting that safe area
Correct.
for that. I'm very
Correct.
open at sharing my failures in life because if anyone else can, not go through that failure process, and I'm very clear, nearly everything I've ever. Do we learn really from successes? I don't know whether we do terribly. It's a very short thing. Boy, do you feel the pain of a failure. And so I think, I don't know. I think
Correct.
that's bad if you do that. Yeah, I think that's gone away as a thing, which is a shame. And I've completely
Yeah, it
taken us off to a
really is.
different topic. Then I can't remember what the question was. You've got me
No, no,
going on the off-piece thing again.
no, you
Well, I don't know.
answered it.
Okay.
You
Oh,
answered
I
it
bet
about
I
what to
thought.
do when SMEs are unavailable. Stop.
All
That
right.
is it. That's the advice. Emotional factors. So you touched on emotional elements of stakeholders and the importance of meeting people where they are and not where you wish them to be, emotionally speaking. So how can project leaders navigate those human factors? Do you have any advice for us?
There's a lot of emotion in the world at the moment, right? And I think keeping your emotions to yourself would be good rather than imposing on some other people. Generally, as well as a leader, I think you've got to keep emotions out of it. In terms of project managers dealing with the stakeholders, I think transparency in everything is a really good thing, right? So just you've got to, here's where I am. These are what my challenges are. I'll be honest with you. This is what I'm nervous about. I'd really need your help in covering me on this. I'm not strong in this area. Being like that, I've always found an open book's a really good approach. So I think having that honest conversation, and but it's a hard balance, right? Some people will look down on you because they think, "Aren't you the expert?" Well, I'm an expert. That's why I know I've got weaknesses, and that's why I know there's some real risk in this thing. I saw a business case fairly recently, and I said, "Oh, well, I'd throw that back at you," because it was all couched in the positive, right? And I said, "Well, how can this thing go wrong?" Like that's what you need to be telling the leader, right? Well,
Correct.
I'm aware of this stuff.
Correct.
You're broadcasting. You are not aware of any real problems. We're doing this. Nothing is universally the right answer. It's the better answer, but it's not universally right. And so you haven't put the counter position. You put no options. You put no counter position. And I would be very
Yeah.
nervous about this. So I think having those conversations openly with the key stakeholders and saying, I think just makes you more credible in terms of that. So, as a former leader, what are you looking for? I'm looking for, um, I'm aware of things. I'm conscious of these things, and this is what I'm going to do to mitigate it. But if anything else comes up that I haven't spotted,
Correct.
this is how I'll go about dealing with it. Like that fills you with
Correct.
confidence. But I think a lot of people feel that sounds like a weakness, right? And, well, being
Yeah.
unconscious of your weaknesses is a weakness, right? So I think that's how
Yeah.
you deal with it.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I think one of the best things you can do as a project manager is to understand where you are not strong and make sure that you plan to put strong people in place to do those
That's the
things.
diversity thing again, isn't it?
Um,
Yeah.
that is it, because at the end of the day, I need to recognize if risk management is not my strength and I am taking on $1 billion project, by crikey,
Yeah.
will I be going out there and hiring an army worth of risk managers so that we have a balanced perspective of what's going on. And you're absolutely right when it comes to business casing. I think the unfortunate part of the business casing process is that it is very much, how do I sell
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
initiative to somebody to invest in? And therefore, we want to present the most positive picture possible. But the reality is, a good investor will challenge you. And that's what I don't see a lot of. I don't see a lot of leaders that lean in and say, it cannot be this easy. No matter what you
Yeah.
think, it is not
Yeah. Yeah.
going to be
Yeah.
this easy. So you go and develop those risks and come back and present this to me when you can give me a really clear picture. Because what I need to do as an investor is to actually say, this does sound like a great opportunity, but I go into it knowing what my risks are and how
Yeah.
this could fail
Yeah.
before I make this investment, which is what you do with everything, right? So it's
Uh,
kind of an
So
interesting one.
totally, and I think data warehousing is a really good example of that. It's like you could make a business case for it, right? You put this stuff in, it gets put it in once, use it loads and loads of times, the whole business gets into it and stuff like that. But then I don't know if it's the case anymore, but 60% of data warehouse projects used to fail. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's an easy one to make a case, but you should be telling them this is a spectacularly complex business engineering exercise. And the
Yeah.
worse our upstream systems are, they could scatter us to hell because the data could be really bad and we don't know. And go through that stuff. But I think when you're managing any stakeholder, you can direct that conversation, right? You should be asking me these things.
Yeah.
I'm bad at risk management, so I'm
Yes.
expecting you to keep me honest on this one. I'll flag it early, and that's building a rapport because you want to insulate that stakeholder from getting caught out. And if you're relatively weak, you need to work with them to make sure that you don't drop them in it. Because you have a lot of
Correct.
influence as a project manager. I've seen project managers
Correct.
selling the most ridiculous things like it's a success. And you think, I don't know, you got away with that. And because everyone in the room wants to be applaud it, right? It's like, whoa, that was a nasty
Correct.
one. So I think if you are a professional, you need to be honest about it and say and be completely open book about stuff. But not all leaders and not all project sponsors are mature enough. So I think it's your job to educate them the way that they should be operating as well. So a lot of them don't know how to do that. You're the professional, right? They're not the professional
Yeah.
project person. So it's an interesting one, but there's an
Correct.
awful lot placed. And that's why it's a senior discipline, right? Project management, because there's way more put on the shoulders of the project and program managers than people think. So anyway, it's important stuff.
It is. Looking ahead, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to project managers or data professionals embarking on a complex data warehousing project to ensure that it does deliver lasting value?
I mean, I've gone from the stage of don't do it. I've definitely come back from that. So that's good.
Just
Just
don't do
don't even
it.
think about it.
No.
Don't even joke about it. It's just like all the stats say, don't do it. Um, so I think it's really being transparent about what it is. If you oversell this beast, you could get hung by it. So it's all of those things around discipline and governance and backing in the people that are gonna that understand how to make it a quality thing. It's getting the breathing space to do the right things. It's being very transparent about it. This is a spectacularly difficult thing to bring about. And not from the technology perspective, and to let it go down there, but for the data itself. And so going in there with that at the start, I think is probably the best thing that I would say is just be realistic about what this is. Because you go in there and you go, oh yeah, this is great, really good. And you get half a day of that. And then you get months and months of torture as you're really struggling to get this thing in. So better you go, oh, this is going to be a tough ride. These warehouses are difficult beasts to do, but we're doing it for the right reason and they are important. When I went to big data, I thought we could get away with it. I don't think you can. You get these hybrid environments now. I don't think anyone's just doing the pure play data warehouse, but there is a necessity to do some of that stuff. It's important. I think it'll actually go up in importance now. This canonical data set that sits in the data warehouse will become more important to fuel some of the AI technologies and stuff like this. Proven, data quality assured, rationalized, whatever, I think will become more important. Maybe not the giant things we used to do enterprise wide and stuff like that. Maybe that'll use other things, but I think it's still important, and but it's not easy. I have to say, short of nuclear fusion, there can't be many more difficult engineering projects than building a data warehouse, a scaled up. I did a project once when I said to them, we're putting some sort of target lineage stuff where it says, well, we did this to the data all the way through, right? So lineage. And this data warehouse they had would have gone on my phone. It was that small, really small. And yeah, it still had 30,000 notes in the lineage thing graph. Like, whoa! So you could, so the numbers I say to people, they go, how many reports do you think you can get out of the data warehouse? 10 field reports. I don't know. Thousands. It's more combinations than there are atoms in the universe by some quite considerable margins. And now when you ask me, why is this thing hard? Let me tell you. And it's the fact that you get these combinations of that and that together, all these things clustered together just makes a combinatory explosion. And then, so anyway, so they're way more difficult beasts. So my answer would be try not to do it if you can. Try to do those kind of, I would say, give the data to the business in Excel, in extract and stuff like that. When they probe, they use it and it's valuable. Sit with them and work with them on it, and let's get them to experiment, show you how they're using it, what they're going to do. If you can, doing that sort of that building up a sort of prototypey approach to it. And then when they go, yeah, this is really valuable. You said, oh, can I have that thing as well? You kind of out that piece and then go and maybe then harden the process back through the warehouse if you can get away with that. That doesn't always work, but you should be trying not to do heavy lifting wherever you possibly can.
We had some key takeaways for today, but do you have any in particular that you think is really important as a highlight of what we've talked about?
What I'd say is data is very volatile, and with it's an entropy thing, right? It will naturally decay very quickly. It's very hard to wrestle down. You'll never get it right. It'd be too expensive to get it, entirely right. So it's a very volatile thing to deal with. And if you don't show some engineering disciplines and quality right throughout, from the way you run the project, and you don't follow disciplines, this thing will get away from you before you can scratch your back and stuff. And so follow a disciplined way of doing things, even when you're under pressure, I think would be the answer. So I've spent most of my life probably following people that didn't do that. And I have to come in and try and repair it. It's desperately unpleasant when you get to that stage. So yes, it's interesting, and I think AI makes it super, super interesting now. But there's an awful lot of hard work, and it's not glamorous. And you need to be robust, and you need to, when you're under pressure, just know that you're going to do the right thing. Maybe no one will appreciate that, but doing the right thing is, I'd say it's all about engineering and discipline, right? Engineered approach, whether you're a project manager, whether you're a data governance person talking to the business, you're doing it in a methodical way. Do you understand how you're learning from your stuff? You're doing it in a nice structured way, a structured way, rather than I'm in here, I do things, I get a bit of glory for a while, and then I'm out of there, and everyone else suffers the consequences of my actions and stuff like that. I'm proud of the stuff we've done and repaired and made stable and stuff like that. And then we get lots of values, and people get to use this stuff, and it has a consequence doing the flow, especially in government.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Really good advice. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up and say a huge thank you to Julian for joining us today. I learn so much from absolutely every interaction that you and I have. So I'm very grateful that we have maintained a friendship and a relationship all these years. It's an absolute joy to talk to you. And I love being able to reminisce about projects past and reflect on what we've learned, which is still all really valuable and has contributed to my skills and the person that I am today. So I'm very, very thankful. And a big thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Powering ProjeX. As you know, I welcome your feedback, hence feel free to drop us a line or send me a suggestion. And if you'd like to show your appreciation for the podcast, please do feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/powering ProjeX. In closing, if you want to join a community that puts your career first, gain global connections, cutting edge skills, and hear from voices just like Julian's who are shaping the project management industry, please do subscribe drop us a line and tell your friends. And until next time, keep powering your projects from vision to victory. With the right governance, a learning mindset, and a focus on quality, your data dreams can become a reality. Stay curious, stay bold, and let's keep building the future one project at a time. This is Julian and DK signing out.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional, legal, or financial advice. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organisations or sponsors. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information on project management methodologies and related topics, no guarantee is made regarding the completeness, accuracy, or applicability of the content to your specific circumstances. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals before making decisions based on the information shared in this podcast. The hosts, guests, and producers are not liable for any losses, damages, or outcomes resulting from the use of this podcast's content. By listening to this podcast, you agree to assume all risks associated with the application of the information provided. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll find value in our discussions.